even have a number pad on there.
Hell yeah.
That thing is ridiculous.
This is the best laptop.
It does look comical. I'm looking at it on screen right now. Yeah. I think Ryan was right. It looks like it has the launch codes on there.
Yeah, definitely.
That was a good call on
You should
that
have
one.
a big handle right here and close it up and like rush off to
Just
somewhere.
in the middle of the show, just pack it up and leave immediately. A red button goes off. All right, I think we're live right now. Hello, everyone tuning in. This is Close to the Metal. This is our weekly computing podcast where we go in depth with a specific computing topic. And today we're going to be talking about the AMD Radeon RX 570, the card, the 500 series that just launched today. So this may be news to you. We didn't know. They didn't really give a
There
whole
were a lot of rumors.
A lot of rumors.
A lot of like screenshots and that kind of thing. But not
still
very
kind of a
much
surprise announcement. I'm Greg Nibbler.
I'm Brad Burke.
And we are live on Facebook and YouTube right now, so we want to hear your questions and comments, whatever you want to know about this. Brad's going to kind of walk us through a whole live review of the card because he's had his hands on it for a while. I feel like we need to address the laptop that's on the table, but maybe we just never talk about it. We'll see. We'll see if we get some questions that come through here and ask about that. All right, let's go into the AMD. I'm sorry, it's just too funny. I can hardly even see you over this thing.
Fine.
It is fine.
It's a totally normal laptop.
Just an absolutely normal laptop. There's nothing strange to see here. Mine's just extremely small, and now I feel inadequate because of that. All right, so let's talk about the AMD Radeon RX 570. Let's talk about this card. So, Brad, this is the next in the line after the 400 series.
Yeah.
Which it seems kind of soon that we're already getting another launch. Because the 400 series was I feel like it was just a couple months ago.
Yeah,
I know it was longer than that, but...
It was June for the 480 and fall for the 470 and 460.
Yeah.
And usually it's like a year and a half. So it's definitely to see them come out this early is definitely a surprise.
Yeah. And they've been pretty busy anyway.
Yeah.
AMD seems like they're pumping out a new product every month.
They're being really aggressive right now.
Last week we just did a show on the Ryzen series. Yeah.
It seems to be working for them. To cut right to the chase on some of it, the chips, the Ryzen chips were awesome, and so are the 500 series GPUs. They're really aggressively targeting their competitors in a way that they haven't in years. So it's just been great.
Yeah, they're going straight after Nvidia and Intel, and they're really going after everybody. I'm seeing a lot of questions come in about how much it costs, and I think, we're going to get into that too. It's kind of along the same lines as the 400 series, correct?
The pricing is exactly the same.
Yeah.
So it's $169 is the starting price for the RX 570, and $200 starting price on the 580. So it's just the same pricing structure. They actually added another card. They had the 460 last year, and now they have another lower price point card, which is the 550, which is I don't think they have pricing quite yet on that. I'm just looking at our page here, and I don't see it. So,
and again, these just came out.
Yeah, the 570 and the 580 launched today. They said the 560 on the 20th, and then the 550 on the 20th, and the 560 a little later. So
okay, so we got 4 different cards coming out in this 500 line, but the 570 and 580 are out right now.
Yep.
So let's kind of go talk about the 570. What's different with this RX 570 compared to this 400 line?
Well, the thing is, almost nothing.
Okay.
That's kind of the story here, is that they're not totally, some people are calling them kind of rebrands, relabels, where you just sort of put the same chip in there and put a new sticker on it and call it a day. And it's not quite that. They are a refined sort of take on the same architecture, but they do have sort of the same thing going on. It's just a faster clock speed. In terms of the 570, it goes from being a base 926 millihertz clock to a 1168 millihertz clock, and a 1206 megahertz boost clock to a 1244 megahertz boost clock. So just kind of a modest bump to its its overall speed. I think the memory bandwidth is up as well to 1650 on the base model, and it's a higher TDP, so that's a little bit different this year. Last year, the RX 480 came out, and it was 150 watt TDP, which technically means it can pull its power off the board, or with one 6-pin power plug from the power supply.
Can pull it off of the board.
But there were some issues. People were saying it was pulling too much from the board, and it turns out that under load, it was actually pushing another 10, 20 watts up above that 150 watt point. So I think this is kind of a reaction to that. Just lean into that and say, it's an 180 watt card for the 580, and it's a 150 watt card for the 570 now. So hopefully they can kind of keep that power in check and sort of have that same thing as last year, where they sort of it pushes up into that range rather than kind of starting there.
So kind of like a modest improvement over what we had before, over the 400 line. Now, why are we getting, and we're going to get into some more specs too. And again, if you're just tuning in, we're talking about the AMD RX 570, the 500 series that just launched today from AMD, and we want to make sure we get your questions in there. So go ahead and drop those in, and we'll make sure we address those. I guess my question is why are we getting this soon?
I think it kind of comes down to what. Again, like what Nvidia is doing right now.
Yeah.
Because as much as the RX 480 really, it came out ahead of the 1060. So AMD sort of had a leg up. They had a foot in the door on the mid-range series when Nvidia didn't have anything below like $350.
Yeah.
So they were able to really take charge there. But the 1060 came out, and at a lower TDP, at 120 watt TDP, it managed to beat out the RX 480 in most cases.
Okay.
And that became the de facto $200 card really quickly. Excuse me. And that was a problem for AMD. So the nice thing that happens here for them is that the RX 570 actually overtakes the RX 480.
So the high-end 400 line is now overtaken by the slightly lower of the 500.
And last year what we saw was kind of interesting in that the 480 was a really good power point. And at the time it was really running the R games and which is admittedly a bit older test suite now. Mm-hmm. It was running games even at 1440p at pretty competitive frame rates for a $200 card, and it was really impressive, which meant spending $10 to $20 less to get the 470 wasn't really a good value.
Yeah, you might as well.
You might as well just pay that $10 and get that card, which comes down to this whole thing about pricing, which we'll get to. But now the RX 570 actually has a reason for existing. It's this card that it beats out the 1060, and I'm bummed we had our RX 580 show up as well, and something was wrong with it. We're working with AMD to solve the problem, and we'll definitely be coming back to that when it comes back around and we get that fixed. But the RX 570 beats the 1060 amp in a lot of our testing at 1080p.
Really?
And that's a big deal because that 1060 especially we tested is a Zotac overclocked version. It's a 6 gig card. And the fact that the 570, which is kind of the budget version, and is like $50 less. It's $190 versus $230, $240.
I mean, that's a huge difference.
That's a big difference. And this 570 is taking a strong lead here. And it'd be really interesting to see what that 580 does. Because if it can push that up even further, again, it might make this 570 look really appealing, or it might make it look kind of irrelevant if you're saying $190 for our overclocked version of the 570,
right?
$200, $210 for a medium to mild model of the 580 might be a better deal.
Yeah, that's true. It could be the same kind of thing. Getting a couple of questions in here as I'm seeing these come through. Jason asks, where do these new cards compare to Nvidia insofar as performance? I think it just kind of depends on what level you're going at.
Totally, but again, this is like the top end for AMD here. So if you're playing at 1080p and you're just like playing games and you're not worrying about like even this, our testing is at ultra settings at 1080p.
Yeah.
And all of our cards, except in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, because that game is very, very challenging, all of our cards produce more than 60 frames per second at ultra quality, like the settings cranked up in Battlefield 1, Civ 6, For Honor, like the kind of games that people are playing just normally.
Yeah.
And if you're just playing
an average gamer.
Right. And if you're just playing on a 60 hertz 1080p screen, these cards are what you're looking at for your gaming, because you're going to spend $200 and it's going to last you 3-4 years, and then you'll replace it with another $200 card.
Yeah, it's a good deal unless you just bought the 480 last week and then now you're realizing.
Well, unless, the only deal there is that actually the prices have been coming down on those really steeply. So I've seen RX 480s as low as $160 with like a copy of Doom or something, thrown in there. So it's actually that's sort of been one of the things that have made people really start to talk about maybe there's a 500 series coming. Is all of a sudden they were really clearing out these 400 chips.
Yeah,
and,
where you could kind of see the writing on the wall that it was going to be happening, which it did happen.
It did. And as far as performance with Nvidia goes, if you're playing on a higher refresh rate panel, if you're playing on 1440p, that kind of thing really consistently, and you want really consistent frame rates, you're going to have to start looking at the 1070, looking at the 1080, or hold out for potentially Vega cards at some point from AMD. But we don't really know much there. So
1440, you're not going to be wanting to get this.
You could if you're just a casual just playing games. I don't have the benchmarks in front of me. I ran some benchmarks at 1440p just to see, but overwhelmingly we find that people are actually playing games at 1080p. That tends to be, if you check the Steam hardware survey, it's usually like 35%, 40% of people are at 1080p. Another 35% of people are at 1136 by 768, and then 1-2% maybe total up for everything higher than that 1440 4K. It's just a really small fraction of people who are actually doing so.
And let us know, what you're streaming on to. Is this card something that you're going to be targeting, or are you looking for that higher end Nvidia? Another question I see that came through here: why do you think AMD doesn't want to do a really high end GPU?
There's another one coming. That's sort of what the Vega cards are supposed to be,
Okay.
and they've kind of teased them. They've sort of shown off prototypes that aren't real. But there is, as far as we know, something higher end coming out from AMD. The last high end thing they did was the Fury, which the performance was good at the time, and in the price point was about the same as the 9080 Ti, with not as good performance and some other issues. The Fury cards had some coil whine issues. They were kind of noisy out of the box, so they make this like as you were playing. You kind
How
of
did that sound go again? Okay, all right. It's technical terms.
It's a technical term.
Yeah.
Coil whine. But it was interesting. You could see it as things changed on the screen in your benchmark.
You could hear the noise would correspond.
Change, as what was going on.
Okay.
Yeah. So there were some issues, and I think they really want to, like they did with Ryzen, just go back to the drawing board, start over, and say we're going to make a high-end card, and here's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what AMD is doing too, because they really are. They're making just a concerted effort to really double down on everything and go after the competition, which is probably good.
Yeah.
Nvidia and Intel, both of those factors need some competition.
Totally.
And AMD is definitely doing it. So with this 500 line, let's get into it a little bit more. And again, we want to get your questions too. So if you're watching live, go ahead and drop your questions in there, and we'll make sure and address those. Let's talk about like the pricing structure. Let's get back to that pricing thing, because I think that is kind of a big point of this.
Right. So when we did our testing, we sort of found that all of these cards, I say, the 570 beats the 480 and all this stuff.
Yeah.
But really, what's going on is, if you look at Civilization 6, for example, 1080p, ultra quality, DirectX 12. All of our systems fall between the four cards, the 470, the 480, the GTX 1060, and the 570.
Yeah.
All fall within 8 frames per second of each other.
So performance-wise, it's really close.
At pace, you're really not going to notice much of a difference. Like in Battlefield 1, again, it's 8 frames per second. It's anywhere between 81 and 89 frames per second at 1080p. And that's great. All those are great, and in real gameplay, you're really not going to notice much of a difference there between any of them.
Yeah.
And it comes down to, feature set, things like that start to matter more. Are you buying a G-Sync monitor or a FreeSync monitor? What games are you playing? All these things start to matter a bit more. But again, you're trading 10% at most performance per second. So when you start looking at these cards, a lot of what it comes down to is that you should almost have a list of like 4 or 5 different GTX models and RX models that you're interested in buying that would be good for your performance level, and then just go punch them all into like PC Part Picker and see which one comes out the cheapest that day.
Because the difference really isn't that much.
The difference, between some of these cards, like you said, it's it's the 570 is $190, the RX 480 is $200 or cheaper now. The 580 is going to start at $200. You're going to see a lot of $210, $220 cards. There's about a $50 window here between $180 and $230 where you can buy any of 4 different cards and not be wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, it really does come down to, sales. Are you getting a game that you want to play? Are you getting any throw-ins? Which one has a better warranty? The Asus Strix 570 has a 3-year warranty because Asus Strix cards are nice and they come with good warranties.
So maybe that's something that you want to go with.
That's something. 3-year warranty. That's like the life of the card, basically. Like in 3 years, you're going to want to upgrade your RX 570. Anyway. So if it breaks any time in that life cycle, just for normal wear and tear, you're covered. That's a great feature. And
so there's a lot of things to decide on.
Yeah, and it comes down to a lot more than just performance per dollar with these cards, with this mid-range card series. It's so crowded in here.
And we've got some really good questions coming in, too, about the AMD RX 570. I do have to address just something in the room right now as far as the laptop that Brad is on. Daniel asks, by the way, my whole college apartment can fit inside that black laptop. Does it have a bathroom and microwave inside? And then also... We've got Rich asks, is that a big thing on the table for DJs at weddings? So
yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Do you want to just say what it is really quick?
This is my novelty oversized laptop. This is the Acer Predator 21X. They just sent us this. I'm very excited to have it. It has a Core i7-7820HK, which is an overclockable processor, 2 GTX 1080s, and a 21:9
in a laptop
screen in a laptop. And a full mechanical, you can't see, there's a full mechanical keyboard and a touchpad on the right that actually, you can kind of see that on the screen. It flips over and becomes a numpad, which is just sweet. It's even backlit, so
it is ridiculous.
It's absolutely insane piece of hardware.
If you're listening via the audio podcast, you'll have to go back and find the video. You've got to take a look at this. All right, back to the nature at hand, though. This is for another show. A question is, how much power does it use when plugged into the PSU? Is what they wrote down there.
So they say it's a 150 watt suggested TDP on the RX 570.
Okay.
So that means 75 watts off the motherboard, 75 watts off the power supply with a 6-pin typically. That said, it's going to depend on the add-in board partner. Most of them are going to do. They said that there would be SKUs, I think, of the 460 without power pins, as well as there are 4 and 8 gig versions of the 560, and there are 4 and 8 gigabyte versions of the 570 and 580 as well. Ours was a 4 gig.
Okay. All right. So some options there. Daniel asks, can an RX 480 be cross-fired with a can an RX 580 be cross-fired with an RX 480?
Yes and no.
Okay.
AMD doesn't officially support that as a crossfire setup.
Okay.
That said, both of those cards are DirectX 12. They both have a high enough DirectX 12 feature set that you can use them in a multi-GPU configuration together.
So if you just bought your 480...
Depending on the game. So if your game is DirectX 12 and it supports the multi-GPU, you could technically do that, and it should work to an extent. But Crossfire is a little different because that was AMD's implementation of SLI, and the way that worked is if you had two, unlike SLI, you could have two different speed cards.
Yeah.
And what it would do is it would, as long as they were in the same family, it would downclock the faster one to match the lower speed card. And in this case, you actually would be able to use the 580 and the 480 to their full potential as much as DirectX 12's multi-GPU setup will let you, which you might see a benefit in games more like Ashes of the Singularity, where they started sort of with this really high feature level set for DirectX 12.
Okay.
So, yes and no.
So yes and no on that one. All right, and again, make sure you get your questions in there. We'll make sure and address each one of these. All right, let's continue on, though, just talking about the 570. And I think we might be running a little bit low on time, but I want to make sure that we cover all of this on here. So say you want to, just as a question, say you're building your PC right now. Mm-hmm. Is this a card that you would want to go with? And you want to be able to have some, like, do some VR gaming. You want to be able to be prepared for some lower end. Granted, maybe not Oculus Rift. I'm sure this may not be high enough for that. Or is this something you could use?
So they I believe this one is technically on the list. The VR certification thing has gotten sort of wishy-washy as of late.
Yeah.
Because
and I know it's confusing probably for as far as figuring out what exactly you would need to use.
Yeah, and there's only one real benchmark at the moment for VR, and it's the Steam VR benchmark. I didn't get a chance to run it on the 570. We don't usually run it on cards, although it's something it'd be interesting to see because it is getting kind of cluttered. But it used to be, they said that the 970 was the entry level. Both Vive recommends it and Oculus requires it.
Okay.
And then there was sort of some change on that, and Oculus is pushing for sort of a lower spec where there's sort of interlaced frames basically to let your computer render at 45 frames per second instead of 90. I will say if you're going for like VR readiness, I would not say to go for one of these cards.
Yeah, go for a higher end.
You should definitely go for a higher end card. Your experience is just going to be much, much better. And you're spending a lot on that VR headset, and I think it's important to make sure that it like lasts, and that as games continue to come out for it, that you can continue to play them well, because they are going to get bigger budget, they are going to get higher production value really quickly. So I do think that you should spend a bit more. If you're looking to build a VR rig, I mean, you could use this. It would work technically, but I definitely think a 1070 or something of that nature would be a better choice.
So what's the top end gaming you could expect with this?
You could play 1080p games, almost any 1080p game. Deus Ex Mankind Divided, sure. Crisis, and I've heard this Player Unknown Battlegrounds. My friends have been playing that. They said it's not very well optimized yet. Like games like that, maybe you have some issues. But like we said, we tested at 1080p, and Battlefield 1, For Honor, Sid Meier's Civilization 6, all very popular games. For Honor, not so much anymore, but that's a different story. Yeah. And they all ran over 60 frames per second. Some of them pretty close to a consistent 75. So if you've got a 60, 75 hertz refresh rate, 1080p monitor, this is for you. If you're building a $600 gaming PC and a $100 monitor, the 570, the 480, the 1060, all great options, all $200. Buy the one that's the best deal.
Yeah,
that's the trick. Is literally sit down with $200 in your hand to buy a card, and buy the one that is the best deal at the price.
And take the time to go through everything, go through a bunch of different websites,
Yeah.
see what they're offering on that time, because that's how close they all are. So what really does anything separate one of these from the other one? I mean, when it
would
comes
say-
down, since the price is so similar.
I would say it's just like if independent of price, the feature set is a difference. So if
Yeah.
you have a FreeSync monitor, go with the AMD. If you have a G-Sync, go with Nvidia.
Sure.
Excuse me. The G-Sync monitors, the Nvidia ones, tend to be a little more expensive, so that can be an extra cost if you want the adaptive refresh, which can be really nice, especially with these mid-range cards. It kind of buys you a longer life cycle because as your refresh rate doesn't quite meet up with new games and doesn't quite reach 60, 75, it still looks really nice. It still looks nice and smooth.
Okay.
So that's a big benefit. Other than that, it's sort of getting to be a wash. The GTX 1060 does have a lower TDP. So if you're looking at a small case or you don't have a very large power supply, I believe there are 1060s without power supplies, but I have to check on that. I might be wrong.
Okay. So that's something that you could factor in there when you're trying to make your decision on
Yeah.
what to get. But I mean, overall, it's getting to be a crowded place, and it sounds like all of these cards are actually really well-functioning cards for a decent price.
Yeah.
Which is a nice change.
Yeah.
A nice change in that.
Yeah,
To
yeah,
be able to actually pick something up like that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so again, talking about the AMD RX 570 and the whole 500 series line that just launched today. And there's a big article about this that Brad wrote, just kind of detailing this, and all the reviews and all the specs are there at digitaltrends.com that you can take a look at. I did want to say, if you're watching live, if there's any final questions that you want to get in here, somebody did ask how much the laptop weighs.
18 and a half pounds.
18 and a half pounds.
So-
So there's your answer on that one.
It's pretty heavy.
That is a heavy laptop. I'm just imagining you sitting on mass transit, just whipping this out. And
I think it'd be funny
no
on an
big deal.
airplane because I'm pretty sure it would take up you and your seat partner's tray tables to try and use it. But maybe you could play a game together or
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, make a friend.
Yeah.
Make a friend in the airport. Okay, we're going to have this as an episode at some point.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be needed.
to
How much
roll
is
in the
that laptop?
luggage. $9,000.
Good God. That's so, pocket change, really.
It's
you can just
really
pick that up.
if it was $4 or $5 I think this would be really in the realm of maybe you should buy this. If you have that much money to throw at a computer,
$9,000.
but at $9,000 you're looking at two high-end 4K gaming PCs and two 4K monitors.
That's a decent used car right there.
Yeah.
That's a decent car. Actually,
So-
yeah, my truck I think was only a couple grand more than that. Wow.
But
Sitting
imagine
right
the
there.
Steez rolling this thing in. It has a big rolling Pelican with special clamps all over it and a foam insert, so you can roll in with that to your LAN party and slam it down.
And have the nuclear launch codes right there. All right. Back to the nature at hand, though. The AMD 570, that is the review today. So again, this is close to the metal. This is our computing podcast where we go in depth with specific topics about computing. And today we're talking about the AMD 500 series launch. So just to kind of wrap up, what do you think that people should take away from this, knowing about the 580, where maybe AMD is heading with this?
I think one of the things that I've been hearing a lot is people
570, I guess is what we're talking
Yeah.
about specific, but yeah.
the people have been sort of saying, because of AMD's reputation over the last few years, there's been a lot of hesitancy to even really listen to this, to even
Yeah.
say you say oh, the 500 series, and they're nah, not interested,
Yeah.
But I think it's really a good time to be, if you're buying a card, to be examining all of your options, to be looking at every card in this price range.
Give a look at AMD.
Yeah, and give a look at AMD because especially I'm really excited to see how that 580 turns out. It's probably worth revisiting that and just seeing how updating and letting everyone know how that went because
Right.
if that card pumps out enough performance,
That might be worth another $20 or whatever the price is going to be on it.
totally.
Yeah,
so
to go
there's
for
just,
that.
Yeah, just look around and make sure you're keeping an eye out for deals because they're going to come and they're going to be, they're going to be really appealing. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you are in the market for one right now, it's a good time. It's a good time to be buying, I would say, probably,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Yeah, with all the different options out there. So, like I said, go to digitaltrends.com. You can read the full in-depth review of this card in particular, and all of the other cards that we've been talking about are all there at digitaltrends.com as well. So you can make sure you can get all the information that you possibly can when you go out to buy a new card. And you can subscribe to the audio podcast of this show. So Close to the Metal, we broadcast live at 10 a.m., usually 10 a.m. We're going a little bit early today. We went early at 9 a.m. today, Pacific time, but usually at 10 a.m. Pacific every Tuesday, we go live with whatever the topic of the day is. The 500 series just came out, so that was our topic today. Next week, who knows? If you have a suggestion, you can always email podcast@digitaltrends.com and subscribe to that audio version, and then that way you get it downloaded as soon as we get done with it. You can subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. It's all right there. And again, thanks everybody for tuning in. This is awesome. We love doing this show, so let us know what you think, and we'll be back next week with another episode.